Hello and welcome to my podcast. My name is Andrea Hackel and I'm your queer life coach. On this podcast, we will take a queer perspective on the deeper meaning of life and discuss topics related to self-help, personal growth, and spirituality through an inclusive lens. Together, we will also explore tools and practices that will help you live a more empowered and authentic life. Thank you so much for joining. Now let's get started with today's episode. Hello and welcome to my podcast. My name is Andrea and I'm your queer life coach. I'm so excited you decided to tune in. Thank you so much for joining. I can't wait to get started with today's episode in a two-part conversation about the queer hero's journey. But before we dive in, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about why I decided to start this podcast right now. So the last 8 years or so of my life has been a journey of going within, finding myself, and letting go of everything that was no longer aligned with the authentic me and this new version I'm growing into. And in the process, I let go of several jobs or a whole career path, really. A marriage that wasn't working. I had to let go of dysfunctional family dynamics. Also had to say goodbye to some friends along the way. So it's been quite a ride. Some of it was really difficult and brought me to my knees and tested my strength and resilience. Other times it's been a beautiful process of reacquainting myself with parts of me that I thought I'd lost, and a journey of learning how to truly love myself. And if you would have asked me 20 years ago or even 5 years ago, I wouldn't have thought it would be possible to get to a place of truly loving myself and becoming my own best friend. But going through this process, I can now truly say I love myself and I have my own back. And I'd always been a very reflective person, but once again, I went within and started to ask myself questions about the deeper meaning of life and what is my mission in life. And of course, this personal transformation didn't just happen in a vacuum, but there was also a lot of change in the larger world, a larger societal transformation with COVID, and now the general uncertainty and instability of the world that we live in. And I realized I'm not the only one who's gone within to ask myself those deeper questions, but I'm realizing from talking to friends and the people around me that others are asking themselves very similar questions. And so I'm hoping by starting this podcast and asking myself these questions out loud, that might be helpful for others as well. And there's also another reason why I decided to start this podcast. So I've always been really interested in topics related to self-help, personal growth, and spirituality. And during this time of change, I turned to books, podcasts, YouTube videos, other resources to help guide me on this journey. And I was really grateful that there's so many wonderful resources out there, many freely available. But I also realized that many of these conversations are not really inclusive of LGBTQ people and other marginalized communities, not only in terms of the language they use, but also, for example, when we talk about personal growth, how frequently they don't consider the societal barriers that still keep LGBTQ people and other marginalized communities from truly living their best lives possible. And it's been very encouraging to see that there's more diverse and marginalized voices joining this space. And I wanted to add my voice to this emerging chorus of marginalized voices in the self-help and personal growth space to create a safe space with this podcast to take a queer perspective on the deeper meaning of life and really view these topics through an inclusive lens. And again, I'm excited you decided to join me for this adventure. So So, keeping all of this in mind, let's get started with today's topic of the queer hero's journey. And you may say, as LGBTQ people and having to come out over and over again throughout our lives, this is a hero's journey in and of itself. And I'll tell you about my coming out journey in future episodes. And I can promise that that was a wild ride too. But today, I really want to focus on the changes I've been through over the last 8 years or so as a way to introduce myself to you. I recently read a book that has had a big impact on me and my thinking around cycles and seasons of change we go through throughout our lives. And that book is called The Hero Within by Carol S. Pearson. And I want to use this book as a framework to, again, tell you more about this journey of change I've been on. I highly recommend reading the book. I'll also put it in the show notes, so no need to write it down right now. This book draws on archetypal psychology and other disciplines to create a framework of 6 archetypes that help explain the cycles of change we go through at different points in our lives. Those 6 archetypes are the innocent, the orphan, the martyr, the wanderer, the warrior, and the magician. And so we will discuss the first 3 archetypes of the innocent, the orphan, and the martyr today. And then in next week's episode, we'll discuss the other 3 archetypes. Before we get started with the discussion of the innocent, there are a few things the author urges us to keep in mind as we're discussing these archetypes. So first thing is, while we will be discussing the archetypes in a linear fashion for the sake of simplicity, we don't progress through them in a linear way. So we may move back and forth between them as we need to relearn, revisit certain lessons. And we may also assume different archetypes in different aspects of our lives. The second thing to keep in mind is that one archetype is not inherently better than the other. So, for example, when we talk about the orphan or the martyr versus the magician, it might be easy to assume that one is inherently better than the other. But really, each of the archetypes comes with its own challenges and lessons. And each of the archetypes also comes with its own gifts and blessings. So keeping all of this in mind, I want to use this framework to tell you a little bit more about my journey over the last several years. So I will first introduce each of the archetypes, and then I will tell you my journey to help exemplify the key learnings of these archetypes. So the hero's journey starts with the fall from innocence. So the archetype of the innocent lives in an unfallen world where we're taken care of. We have parents or authority figures around us who meet our needs. And the world seems overall like a happy place. The lucky few among us with happy childhoods, childhood might have been a place of innocence. And for others with more difficult childhoods, and myself included, the discussion around the innocent might bring up more conflicting thoughts and questions. So in my background, I didn't necessarily have a happy childhood. There was lots of drama, lots of challenges during childhood, periods of intense anxiety and depression. So reading about this stage of innocence, I wondered if I ever lived in that pure state of innocence. And I'm still asking myself that question. So I had an easier time thinking about this stage when thinking about happy times with friends, times when my romantic relationship was going really well, or times of professional fulfillment. So as you can imagine, we can't live in this stage of innocence forever. And at some point or different points in our journeys, we experience a fall from innocence and we enter the orphan stage. Before we talk more about this fall from innocence and the orphan stage, I want to tell you a little bit more about what my life looked like about 8 years ago. I was in the process of finishing up a PhD program in communication studies in Washington, D.C. I loved the program. I would say I was thriving in the program. And I assumed as I was getting ready to defend my dissertation and to finish up the program, I assumed things will continue to be easy. I planned on finding a job in DC with wonderful, caring people and working on issues and causes that I really care about. So, yeah, again, I approached it with a sense of innocence and naivety, I would say. In the same year, I also got married to my now ex-wife. And there were issues in our relationship right from the beginning. And throughout the relationship, I would hear little whispers in my soul and heart telling me I'm not on the right path. But I didn't want to listen because while things were not perfect, my life was the most stable it had ever been. And I wasn't ready to let that go. So throughout the years, those whispers became louder, and at some point, I could no longer ignore them. But at this point, about 8 years ago, I was committed to that life. I didn't want to let it go. And so a day that really exemplifies this fall from innocence for me is the day I defended my dissertation. So in order to celebrate, my ex-wife's aunt had invited us to use her beach house in Delaware. And we had plans to relax, celebrate, and take it easy. Drove to Rehoboth right after my defense. And I remember waking up the morning after my defense, again in a beautiful beach house. Weather was nice too, as far as I can remember. And I remember, instead of feeling like celebratory and full of joy, I felt like I'd almost like fallen into a black hole, because it occurred to me that I really did not know what to do. I wasn't even sure in what direction I wanted to move professionally. And so after years of being on this very steady path forward, I felt like I didn't know what to do. As you might have guessed, this is where I experienced my fall from innocence and entered the orphan stage. But before I tell you more about what that looked like in my life, let's go back to the book and talk more about what the author is saying about the fall from innocence and the orphan stage. So again, at some point in our journey, at different points in our journeys, we experience a fall from innocence. And this is where we enter the orphan stage. And this is where we become disillusioned with the world and feel powerless and without agency. We feel abandoned by the people around us and want to be safe. And instead of claiming our own truth, we search for answers in other people. Some of the lessons we are invited to learn during this stage is self-reliance and finding our own truth. We're also called to learn that pain and disillusionment are part of the journey, and that we're here to experience a range of emotions, and that life is not just about being happy. So the way this showed up in my life is when I entered the quote-unquote real world in Washington, D.C. Again, I felt a lot of fear coming out of the PhD program, where I had a supportive community around me, supportive professors, and all of a sudden, I felt like it was just me. And so instead of going within and taking some time to think about what I really wanted to do, I took the first job that I could get with an organization in DC. And again, I was pretty naive about what my life in DC would look like, and I was not prepared for the cutthroat culture in DC. So I really struggled. Instead of professional fulfillment, I sat in front of Excel sheets for most of my days, and nothing against Excel. I love Excel, but I think everyone who knows me well would agree that Excel sheets are not my strength. Instead of connecting with people around issues I really cared about, I struggled with a sense of being othered at work, feeling unseen at work. So it was a really difficult start in DC, and I felt lost. At the same time, the issues in my marriage were becoming more pronounced, and me and my ex-wife started more and more to live separate lives. And those whispers in my heart and soul telling me I'm not on the right path were only becoming more pronounced. But I was not ready for any big changes yet. And I remember so well one day sitting in my cubicle at work, and I had a bit of a downtime from work. And there was this inner call, this inner pull telling me I should start writing down my journey. Even though I had no idea about how to write a memoir or the book world in general, I started writing down first sentences of my book. And now looking back, I feel like that is the moment when I unknowingly said yes to my hero's journey, but at the same time, not expecting how wild that ride will be. But for a little while longer, I wasn't ready to make any other big changes. I wanted to hold on to that old life for a little longer. According to the book, during this orphan stage, we may also turn to self-destructive habits as ways to escape the pain. So that may be through drugs, drinking, overworking, engaging in toxic relationships. And for me, that habit was overworking. I not only threw myself into the job that was not aligned with my soul, but also took up volunteering and in general kept myself so busy that I didn't have time to go within and think about what's not working in my life. So here you can also see the martyr archetype showing up. And during this stage, we learn important lessons about caring for others and taking care of others and giving freely without any expectations. At the same time, we may overgive to a job, a relationship, a cause in order to not have to go inwards and not have to go on a journey. And so again, I was really committed to this life that looked good on paper, but felt really numbing inside. So at this point in my life, I wasn't ready to go within and fully face myself and my shadows and say yes to this journey. I wanted to hold on to that life that looked good on paper because the alternative was too scary. And I didn't feel ready to step into the unknown. Then in April 2018, there was a major turning point in my journey. And I received a call that changed my life. So I remember, I think it was a Friday, I was working from home. My building was connected to a coffee shop. So I worked from that coffee shop and I received a call from my grandmother. She sounded very calm and told me that my dad didn't have much time left and the family was preparing for him to pass. He'd been ill for quite some time, but no one expected for him to pass so soon. So it was a shock. So my dad and I had a difficult relationship and we'd been estranged for several years, barely spoke. But I was in shock and I did not know what to do. For some reason, I didn't want to go back to Austria right away. For context, I'm originally from Austria and that's where my dad was still living when he passed. I didn't know what to do. I called my ex-wife, told my friends, but I didn't want to go back because it would have made it too real too soon. So instead, that day, I remember going to work because I had a meeting and I broke what I consider to be a major social role in DC and cried in front of my boss. And she asked me what I'm even doing coming into work and that I should be going home to Austria right away to see my dad. But again, I wasn't ready to go back to Austria and face the reality. So I remember for a bit, I just wandered around in DC, not knowing what to do. And my ex-wife ended up convincing me to go back to Austria, which I'm grateful to this day. And on the plane, I was preparing for the difficult conversations we might have. But as soon as I landed in Austria, I learned that he had passed while I was on the plane. So we would never have that conversation. And that was another big shock for me. I remember sitting in my childhood bedroom, dealing not only with the death of my father, but also with some family drama around the funeral. And I had a deep sense that my life will never be the same again. And I think I could sense that there were major changes on the horizon. And I remember a conversation I had with my therapist before my dad died, and me telling her, "Oh, I don't think it's gonna hit me too hard when he passes because we're not really in touch." And I remember my therapist saying, Andrea, it's gonna be hard for you, and yeah, and you're gonna grieve him in your own unique way. You're not only gonna grieve him, but also what could have been, and you're gonna grieve the end of an era. And that's exactly what it felt like. An era was coming to an end, and a new chapter was beginning. And I had a sense that there were some big changes on the horizon. So this is where we're going to leave it off for today. Just a little cliffhanger. And we will talk more about my journey on the next episode. But I can tell you that my life today looks completely different than it did 8 years ago. Again, we will talk more about my journey in the next episode. And in part 2 of this conversation, we will also talk about the archetypes of the wanderer, the warrior, and the magician. And I'll tell you more about how those showed up on my journey. Before I sign off for today, I would love to leave you with a reflection question. So I hope to end each episode with either a reflection question or another type of activity that helps you reflect and integrate the learnings from the episode. I will also put the question in the show note, and the question is the following. In what aspect of your life do you currently feel an inner call to embark on a hero's journey? Again, thank you so much for joining, and I really appreciate you tuning in. And before I log off for today, I also wanted to leave you with a couple words. I know with everything going on in the country and the larger world, things can feel dark and uncertain right now. But I want you to know that you are not alone. You are loved. And I really hope you are kind to yourself during these times. Again, thank you so much for joining, and I hope you'll tune in again for our next episode together.